Hello world, Joe Strout here with another coffee break coding. You know, we are 1 week into our 3-week try it contest for March, so I thought we would talk about something that you could easily do in a try it game, rolling dice. Everything we're going to do today would work just as well in MiniMicro or on the command line, but we're going to use the try it page since that's what the current contest is all about. So you just point your browser to https://miniscript.org/tryit, and it should come up looking a little bit like this. If the source code and output areas are stacked vertically, like this, just stretch your window out a bit and they should pop right back to side by side. At least that's the way I prefer to use it. And it'll probably have some initial source code in here. This is just to give you sort of some sample code that runs, asks you what you want to count down from, you give it a number, and it counts down from that number. But that's not what we want to do today, so I'm going to just select the source code and clear it. We want to simulate rolling dice. To do that, you need to generate a random number. So let's start with print RND. RND is the built-in random function. And every time we run this, it's going to generate a new number between 0 and 1. That's quite close to 1, but it'll never actually get to 1. In fact, let's make this a little bit faster to learn from by putting in a for loop and generating a whole bunch of random numbers. So we'll say for I in range 1 to 10, and I like to indent the guts of the for loop, and 4. Oh, got keyword. Oh, I said for I in range, but I didn't actually type it. For I in range 1 to 10, print rand, and 4. There we go. Okay, so now you can see it's generating a bunch of numbers, always between 0 and 1. Now, let's say we were trying to simulate rolling a 6-sided die. What we want is a number from 1 to 6. We can get part of the way there by multiplying these numbers from 0 to 1 by 6, and then we'll have a number from 0 to 6. To make it really clear what's going on, I'm going to assign our random number to a variable. We'll just call it R, and then we're going to print R, and then a little arrow to show what R becomes when we do R times 6. Okay, so here's a bunch of numbers. You can see each one is generated initially between 0 and 1, then we multiply it by 6, and we have floating point numbers from 0 up to, but not quite, 6. Now to generate an integer from 1 to 6, what we want to do is round these fractional numbers up to the nearest whole number. And we can do that with the ceil function, which stands for ceiling. Oops, get the cursor over there. So take the ceiling of R times 6, and actually let's print another arrow so we can see what's going on. Okay, so for example, if R&D gave us 0.86, that multiplies by 6 to 5.19 and then rounds up to 6. And let's see, on the low end, here's a 0.16 that was generated by R&D, rounds up, or multiplies by 6 up to 0.9, and then rounds up to 1. So this will give us an even distribution of numbers from 1 to 6, just like rolling a die. Now let's make a function so that we can call this wherever we might need it. We'll call it d6. That's a function which just returns ceil of R&D times 6. So that's just wrapping up into a little function called d6, what we did here. Generate a random number, multiply it by 6, and take the ceiling of that. So let's just call that 10 times. And there we go. We're generating numbers from 1 to 6. Now, if you've done any tabletop gaming, you've probably encountered dice that have a different number of sides other than 6. And these are frequently called things like D4 for a 4-sided die, D10, D12, there's a D8, and a D20. Those are all common. So let's make a function that can generate a roll for a die with any number of sides. Let's call it just D, and we'll take sides as a parameter. And we can have it default to 6 by adding equals 6 here. So if you don't specify how many sides you want, you get 6, but if you do specify, you can get any number. And of course, this is a trivial change to what we had before. We just changed the 6 to the the specified number of sides. So now we can print any number of sides on our die. For example, D8 would give us numbers from 1 to 8. If we want a D20, there's D20. All right, this is great. Let's just take it one step further. In a lot of tabletop gaming, we refer to rolling multiple dice with a notation like 3d6, which means roll 3 6-sided dice. Now we can't define a function that takes a parameter before the function name, but we can define a function that takes 2 parameters. So let's add number of dice as the first parameter and number of sides as the second parameter. We can put some spaces in to make it neater. The computer doesn't care if you put in spaces there or not, but let's do it. Now, you might be tempted to just take your random die roll here and multiply it by the number of dice, which is not correct, but let's see what happens. Let's say I'm rolling 3d6, so 3 dice, 6 sides each. The trouble here is you might notice these are all multiples of 3. That's because this just rolls 1 die and then multiplies it by 3. That's not the same as rolling 3 dice and adding them up. To do that, what we're going to need is another for loop, and we're going to need to keep track of the total. So let's say total is initially 0, and then for I in range 1 to number of dice, we want to generate a roll and add it to the total. Total plus, and then return the total. All right, now let's try it. Oops, I left in times number of dice. That was a mistake. Okay, so let's review, make sure I haven't made any other errors. A function of the number of dice and the number of sides, start with a total of 0, loop number of dice times, and then add to our total the ceiling of R&D times the number of sides, which is a random number from 1 to sides. And at the end, return the total. There we go. So this is rolling 3d6, which is always going to be at least 3 and no more than 18. And it'll tend to favor the numbers in the middle, around 11 or 12. So I think that concludes our little excursion into rolling dice in MiniScript. With this, you could make all sorts of games. In fact, I just got a book from Steve Jackson Games with a whole collection of dice games you can play with ordinary dice. Any of those would be a great little program to write in the Try It page, and maybe enter the Try It contest. I'll put the link to the contest in the description below, but you can find it here on the MiniScript forums. It's really easy to enter, and you can win up to $25, so I hope you check that out. If you're new to MiniScript and you want to learn more about it, go to miniscript.org. We've got all sorts of fun ways to use MiniScript, lots of documentation, and you can even find a link to our new book, Learn to Code in 30 Days, on Amazon. You can also help support MiniScript development by going to the MiniScript press link and checking out our cool merch. We've got t-shirts, we've got pop sockets, with more goodies coming soon. But most importantly, play around with MiniScript, and I hope you'll consider entering the contest because it'll be a lot of fun. Happy coding!